Natural treatments for our health and well-being are becoming more popular today, but how many of us are aware that plants can help us fight cancer and that this may be happening right here in our own backyard in southern Alberta? Joining me to discuss this is Dr. Roy Golsteyn. He is the director of the Cancer Cell Laboratory and the Natural Product Laboratory at the University of Lethbridge. He's also the vice president of the Natural Health Product Research Society of Canada. That is a mouthful. Dr. Golsteyn, welcome to the show. It's good to have you on today.
Thank you. So thank you for having me today.
Of course. Now, first of all, can you share what you and your team are doing with your research into the possible health benefits found in some of the local flowers and plants that are growing right around us here in southern Alberta?
Sure, that's right. What I can tell you is that, as you mentioned, we are a research team at the University of Lethbridge. And for a few years now, we've decided to look very, very closely at the plants that grow in this area, and then to see if they have any medical properties that might be useful for, well, for patients largely in cancer, but also in some other domains as well. It's an area now that we've been in for about 7 years.
That's interesting. So I know I didn't realize this, and maybe many of us didn't associate plants necessarily with fighting cancer. So what type of plants can have that potential cancer fighting ability?
Well, in fact, it turns out that the plants really are the best medicines in many cases, and especially in cancer. Prior to joining the University of Lethbridge, I used to work in the pharmaceutical industry. And so I'm sort of attuned to the idea of looking at plants in the first place. But really, it is that the number one, the number two, and the number three cancer medicines in the world come from plants. And so, of course, that makes it a bit more obvious knowing that maybe we need to look at some of the plants, in this area as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, you say that your mission is to find all the chemicals in all of the plants. So have you been able to find any new plants over the last year with potential cancer fighting chemicals? And I hear that you're even putting drones to use in searching for these plants.
That's right. We've actually been moving to a number of new technologies to help us work through this. In fact, but in fact, it turns out often, at least in the area where I work, it's sort of in the scientific domain. When people think about plants, what they do is they tend to think of the tropical regions, such as the Amazon. And there's a lot of scientists who have gone to that area to look for plants. And then, as it turns out, there was an idea that came with a colleague of mine, Dr. Sophie Kernice, who's at Lethbridge College, and my laboratory about 7 years ago. With some of the experiences that we've had working elsewhere, we realized that the plants from this area, from southern Alberta, have not really been studied. But in fact, there's some really good scientific reasons why maybe they should be. And so we launched a number of pilot studies, and it turns out those pilot studies were very, very interesting right from the very beginning. And indeed, we have found some plants. We found some chemicals inside those plants that I think that are really on a start to an interesting path.
Yeah, it's interesting that you have a collaboration with Lethbridge College, in which I've actually had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Kernice. So that was pretty fascinating as well. Now, Dr. Golsteyn, you've spoken with local Indigenous people here about some of the use of their traditional uses of native plants species. So which plants have they used as potential healing methods?
Yeah, that's right. That's a very important point, because when I mentioned that, when I say that not a lot is known about the plants in this area, what I'm really saying is not a lot of scientific information is known about the plants from this area. But in fact, the First Nation peoples who live here from the Blackfoot Confederacy, there's actually two tribes with which we work, the Kainai and the Piikani. We actually contact them right at the very, very beginning of this project, because as you just mentioned, they actually know quite a bit about the plants. And it's been very, very interesting for us at a number of different levels. What we've been doing is we've been consulting with them on some of the plants, and we work with one. We actually, they've asked us to be using the Blackfoot name on these. So sometimes we don't even know the Western scientific name. In one case, there's a plant that's called, if I pronounce it correctly, it's Samanitis. And this was brought forward to us from a student at the University of Lethbridge and an elder working with her. And we've been fortunate too, the University of Lethbridge, and I'll say Lethbridge College too, both of these centers really support this type of work, and have been quite involved in trying to bring these two views that of the First Nations, and also that of scientific research together.
What a great idea. That's absolutely fantastic. Now, here's a name of a plant that I really like. What can you tell us about the brown-eyed Susan?
Yes, well, as it turns out, we can now tell you quite a bit. We've been working on this plant for a number of years, and it really was one of the first ones that captured our attention. So that's a very striking plant. It'll be blooming in this area. Well, we still have let's say maybe early July, a little bit of time to wait yet. Turns out that plant, so it is known to ranchers and such to be toxic. So we took a look at it pretty early on. And to our happy scientific surprise, we found it actually did very, very well in some of the starting cancer tests that we did. Some of the work that we've done on it, we've isolated the chemical that's responsible for that anti-cancer activity. We're very closely with scientists in University of British Columbia and in Switzerland on this project, because it turns out to be this chemical stops cells, cancer cells especially, from dividing. And so we want to know a lot more about it. It turned out to be important too, because it opened our eyes really to some new problems and to some plants in this area that might have similar properties as well. No, that's one of our star plants.
That is absolutely fascinating. Is that being used already in modern medicine, or is it kind of just on the tip of your research basically right now?
No, it's on the tip of our research. These processes are quite long. That's going to take a few years. We really have to do quite a bit of work yet, and we're bringing in more teams from other centers to help us to go faster with these studies. When I say I have to be careful. It's I talk about this as being potential cancer treatments. It doesn't mean that these aren't medicines. What it does mean, however, is that they're on the right path to getting there, and then they'll be looked at very, very carefully and to see just how good they are.
Interesting. Now, I understand that the wolfberry plant, also known as the snowberry, is showing signs of promise when cells from these plants are exposed to light. Can you explain how you get the right part of the plant and how it needs to be treated to reveal potential use in fighting cancer?
Yes, yes. That was a very interesting story for us as well, in fact, because it began there was a person who lived on a small farm just outside of Edmonton who actually contacted us. And she said that maybe we should look at this plant. And she contacted us really at the right time. We had the opportunity and the resources to start that. And what it turns out is that there's the plant as the wolfberry or the snowberry. It too has some very interesting chemicals in it. These chemicals probably are going to be more for a different disease. They're going to be linked with, well, they are linked now with a disease. It's a rare childhood disease that's called a Pelge-Huet syndrome. And the reason why that turned out to be very, very important for us in my laboratory and also at the university is that we were never expecting that. And so it's teaching us a bit of a lesson that we really need to keep our eyes open, and that we really need to look carefully at all the plants that are here, because we can't really be sure, we can't predict ahead of time what we're going to find. And so by looking at all of them, and earlier you mentioned our mission, that's why we want to look at all the plants and all the chemicals that are inside them. I think we're going to find some very, very interesting things that way.
I think you are too. Now, do you have a ballpark guess as to how long it may take to see these plants actually used to treat cancer?
Yeah, our ballpark number is usually around 10 years, in fact. But the pandemic is teaching us a lot of things. Of course, all of us were in the middle of this terrible pandemic. There's been some good news on the science side with that, is that with the pandemic, I think scientists are learning now how to work faster and to work more efficiently. And I think as soon as we get through this pandemic, that type of information is then going to move into the areas where my laboratory and other laboratories work. And we really, really hope that we can shorten that time by quite a bit.
Yeah, I hope so too. And by the way, what kind of responses to your research are you getting from the global scientific community?
Well, it's been quite a range. I think as many of us who live in Lethbridge know, I think some people, many of the people that we were talking about, first they didn't know where Lethbridge or Southern Alberta was. So at first talking to them wasn't so straightforward. But what's been happening is really through the work of Dr. Kernice and now with the University of Lethbridge, we've been able to talk to more and more people, and they've realized that this idea of looking at plants that grow in Canada, that grow in areas that we've never really explored before, that have connections with perhaps some of the First Nation communities, they're realizing that we actually need to do a lot more work in that area. And the last few years have been much more productive. We now work, as I mentioned, with Brown-Eyed Susan and with a team in Switzerland, team in UBC. We have another project where we work with a team in Belgium, teams in France, and of course, more teams in Canada as well. So it's been picking up quite a bit. And I guess too, part of our idea is that we really need to focus on the strengths of the area where we live. Maybe people in business, they might appreciate this as well. Global science has also become much more competitive science. So where we find ourselves sometimes competing with large universities like the University of Toronto or the universities in the San Francisco area. And so we thought we really need to draw from the strengths that we have here in Southern Alberta, our agricultural knowledge, our connections with communities, our plants that are from this area. And I think that's been helping us quite a bit. Now I'm becoming much, much more positive.
Absolutely. And it's such a great way to put the University of Lethbridge and Southern Alberta on the map too, especially with these European
they've been very
nations.
supportive.
Yeah, other countries that, like you said, hadn't even heard of Alberta. That's fantastic. Now, Dr. Golsteyn, I'm told that your research also may be put to use for natural cosmetics. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it wasn't one of our ideas at the very, very, very beginning. I'm not a person, I myself don't use a lot of cosmetics, but we began to realize just by, there are stores in Lethbridge that are now promoting cosmetics based on natural products. And we see that in some of the larger shops as well. And then we thought, well, maybe some of the plants here might be important for that. And it turned out we've done some preliminary work. I have a research team at the university who's working on this as well. And indeed, yes, as we know too, that the plants in this area grow under some very harsh conditions. And so the plants produce chemicals that help them adapt to that. And those are the natural products that work very, very well in cosmetics. And so we think too, here we're quite optimistic and we have some good scientific data to support that. We think here too that we might have some very interesting products, maybe for that field. And if I could just add one more part to that, I've noticed too, it's attracted students who maybe aren't so interested in some of the physics that comes with this or some of the other aspects. But it turns out they're quite interested in maybe some of the wellness areas that come with these plants. And these students have now been finding a way to work in research laboratories as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating that work that you're actually doing there. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us today, Dr. Golsteyn.
Thank you. No, it's my pleasure, and I appreciate the interview.
Yeah, thanks so much for being with us. Dr. Roy Golsteyn is the director of the Cancer Cell Laboratory and the Natural Product Laboratory at the University of Lethbridge. So glad to have him on today. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.